where, if you some of you remember, our colleague Professor Chiranjeev Mitra hails from, was a postdoctoral fellow there, and we are familiar with the group activity there because some of their members visit us. So Siddharth currently is a condensed matter physicist, but you can see the recent works all into this quantum domain, quantum sensing, quantum metrology, nitrogen defect in diamond. So these are the kind of things where you need optics and you need very sensitive handling of defects. So today, let's hear this screen with Siddharth. I'm quite curious to hear because you see in India we don't have very good experimentalists. I would not really know our colleagues, but particularly in this domain, you can see apart from IIT Bombay, you don't have many people. I saw Pune, our Chiranjeev is starting here, but he had difficulty with experiment. I saw Pune, Moyes is there, but IIT Bombay and now IIT Madras has taken lead. So let's hear Siddharth. Siddharth, stage is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. This is my honor, kind of giving this invited talk organized by QIQT Kolkata. So let me start sharing my screen. Can everyone see this?
No problem.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to focus on optically active spin defects for quantum technology. It's going to be fairly generic talk, but from my perspective, I've been in this field for last 7-8 years, and whatever I have done and whatever I've learned, I just want to share. Okay. So here is the outline of my talk. Initially, I'll start section 1. It's just going to be some generic properties of optically active spin defects as qubits, why they are useful at all. Then in the second section, I'll talk about something that is very important as far as these optically active spins are concerned, which is controlling their charge state, which is generally not a topic of interest for quantum information people. Then the third thing is nuclear spin control, because all these electron spins are generally coupled with nuclear spins. So that's another thing that is very essential. And the last portion is thing that I have started dealing with in last couple of years, how we can use machine learning to mitigate decoders. Okay, so let me start with section 1. Let's start talking about qubits. What do we need for a good qubit? So at least there are like 3-4 essential attributes that everyone wants to have as far as qubits are concerned. There are a bunch of desired attributes depending on what you actually want to do, but essential attributes are something like it needs to have long enough coherence lifetime. So if you create a particular quantum state, it should retain that state for long enough time. Then you should be able to initialize that qubit into particular state, right? If you can't initialize, you can't actually control the qubit. So good initialization, good control. So you should be able to actually manipulate the spin state. You should be able to generate superposition state if required. And at the end of everything, at the end of all quantum operations, you should be able to read it out. Okay, so these are the essential attributes, and then there are a bunch of desired attributes like sizes of fabrications and stuff like that. So my aim for this particular talk is to tell you how to do this with optically active spins and why they are useful. Okay. So what are optically active spin defects? So I'm going to focus mostly on nitrogen vacancy centers in diamond, which is the most popular spin defect. But when I say diamond, generally people generally start picturing these brilliant crystals like diamond, right? We can actually, most of the crystals that I work with are lab-grown diamonds. They look something like this, right? But all these colors are due to defects. So what is diamond? So if you zoom in, by zooming in, I mean, if you have a TEM or something like that, you'll see that diamond is actually just made out of carbon crystals arranged in periodic manner. But every now and then what can happen is that you can have a missing carbon atom, and then there can be a nitrogen close to it. So nitrogen replacing another kind of carbon atom that forms what we call a nitrogen vacancy center. It's a defect, atomic scale defect. But how do you study this defect, and why is this defect important? So that's where the optical activeness of this defect comes into play. So what we are doing here, if you want to actually study this defect, then what you need is what we call a confocal fluorescence microscope. So the idea is very simple. What we are doing is we're shining this diamond, which has certain defects. We're shining this diamond with a green laser around 520, 530 nanometer wavelength. We shine it, then you excite this defect. The defect will get de-excited eventually by emitting a photon. You can then actually use something what is known as a dichroic beam splitter to actually separate the laser illumination light and the fluorescence, and then you can collect it using a single photon detector. Now you can actually scan the sample, and this is the image that has been generated. It's a real image where you have single NV centers in multiple pillars. Okay, so these are nano pillars, and you see a single NV center. Now I have given you the spatial scale right here, and you can see that the spot size is of the order of few hundred nanometers, and that's limited by diffraction limit. Although the defect is atomic scale, if you are using this what is known as confocal fluorescence microscope, the smallest size that you can see or image is of the order of diffraction limit, which is on the order of lambda by 2. Now what you can do is you can collect these photons. So here I'm just counting photons right in this image. But if I just send those photons to a spectrometer, then what I get is something more complex. I don't get like a single peak or anything like that. I get something that is made out of two peaks, and these two peaks are actually related to two different charge states. One charge state is neutral charge state, and another charge state where this defect has actually trapped an extra electron. Okay, so now we are going to focus mostly on this negatively charged nitrogen vacancy center. So this negatively charged nitrogen vacancy center, it has 6 extra electrons. You can forget about first 4. They get paired amongst themselves. So we are left with last 2 electrons. Now these 2 electrons can be arranged in 4 different configurations: 3 triplet states, 1 singlet state in a ground state. Okay. Now the ground state of this defect is a triplet state. So this is the energy level diagram of this state. This is within the band gap of diamond. Diamond has a large band gap. So these energy levels are sitting inside the band gap of diamond. Okay. Now the ground state is ms equal to 0. In the ground state, you also have plus minus 1, ms equal to plus minus 1 state. There is a small splitting between those two, which is 2.87 gigahertz at room temperature. This is what we call zero field splitting. Even if you apply no electrical magnetic field, you will always have this splitting. Plus minus 1 levels at room temperature without any additional external field, they are going to be degenerate. Okay, so they'll have same energy. This is the excited state, and this is the singlet state. Now this energy level actually becomes very essential when we consider the quantum properties of these defects, and let me actually decipher this one. Okay, so first thing that we need for any qubit is spin initialization, right? So let's have our defect sitting in ms equal to 0 state. Okay, initially we don't know where it is sitting, but let's assume that it is in ms equal to 0 state. Now if I shine a photon on this defect, you can then excite this defect into excited state. It will go into excited ms equal to 0 state, and then eventually it's going to get de-excited. Now there are 2 ways in which it can get de-excited. It can either go through this singlet, which is a non-radiative transition, or it can just come back and emit a photon. Now with ms equal to 0 state, it is more probable that it will just come back and emit a photon. Okay, that's what generally happens if you start in ms equal to 0. If you start in plus minus 1 state instead, then what's going to happen is that when you excite, it generally prefers the second round. So it goes through this singlet state and comes back to this ms equal to 0 state without emitting a visible photon. So virtually it's a dark state. Okay, so 2 things are happening here. First thing is, no matter which state you begin in, 0 or plus minus 1, after a couple of cycles, you generally end up in ms equal to 0. So that's good. That allows you to spin initialize. And the second thing that is happening is that if you now look at the number of photons that are coming out from this system, you are getting photons when you are in ms equal to 0 state, whereas if you are in ms equal to plus minus 1 state, you are not getting a photon. So I'm just putting a detector to collect this photon now. So in one case I get a photon, in the other case I don't get a photon. Okay. So now the same mechanism allows me to read out the spin state as well. So two things with the same energy level structure is allowing me to initialize the spin and also to read out the spin. So now how do you manipulate this? So in order to manipulate the spin, you need to supply energy that is equal to the energy separation between 0 and plus minus 1 levels. This is around 2.87 gigahertz, which is microwave frequency. So what we need to do now is we need to supply microwave frequency. For doing that, you can actually build an antenna, you can have a resonator that resonates at this particular frequency, or a coplanar waveguide that can transmit this particular frequency, or you can just put a wire. Okay, so wire becomes very lossy beyond 3 or 4 gigahertz, but up to 3 gigahertz is more or less not so bad. Okay, so you can actually transmit microwave frequencies. And now, if NV center is close to this microwave wire, it's going to interact. And let's see how it interacts. Okay, so what it's going to do now is that let's look at this orange code. We are shining laser continuously. This is known as CW, continuous wave ODMR experiment, optical detection of magnetic resonance. So what we are doing is we are shining a green laser continuously, and then we are also transmitting microwave frequency. But we are changing the frequency. Okay, we are changing the frequency. So we start at 2.87, and we are collecting photons. Okay, we are collecting how many photons we are getting. Nothing happens until the time this frequency is in resonance with this level. Okay, this level separation. When it's in resonance, what's going to happen is that you are going to actually change the spin state. It will go to from 0 to plus minus 1. Now, as we saw, plus minus 1 has a less probability of emitting a photon. So what's going to happen is that the photon count rate will go down when you are in resonance. Okay, so only when you are in resonance, you will get a dip. If you are not in the resonance, you won't get a dip. Okay, dip in fluorescence count rate. That's what's happening. Now, just by looking at this picture, you can already see that if we apply now magnetic field, it's going to cause Zeeman splitting. The plus minus 1 levels are going to split. Okay, and then once they split, you are going to get two different features. One that goes from 0 to minus 1 level, and second that goes from 0 to plus 1 level. So this becomes a very nice magnetic field sensor. Okay, so it becomes very sensitive to local magnetic fields now. Okay, that's what's happening. So you have a single NV center, you bring it closer to certain magnetic field, it will interact with that static magnetic field due to Zeeman interaction, and then if you apply microwave frequencies, you will be able to decode what kind of field it's experiencing. So that's why it becomes a very nice quantum sensor. Okay, so in this figure we are only dealing with static magnetic field, but this level separation is can be changed with electric field due to Stark effect, due to strain related fields, due to temperature, because even temperature will actually change the separation between 0 and plus minus 1 level. So this becomes a very nice quantum sensor in general: electric field, magnetic field, and temperature. Okay, now in this slide I'm going to show how this sensor can also be used to sense AC magnetic fields now. Now AC magnetic field time average is going to be 0, right? So you won't get actually static magnetic field, but that's where the quantum nature comes into play. So what is happening now is we make our protocol slightly more complex. In the previous protocol, the laser was on all the time, the microwave was on all the time. We were just changing the frequency, and the detector was detecting the counts at all times. What we are doing here now is that we initialize this spin. Okay, so we shine laser for a few microseconds. That is going to put that spin into ms equal to 0 state. Okay, so after this initialization, we are going to start in ms equal to 0 state. And again, at the end, I'm going to shine laser and read out for few hundred nanoseconds before I destroy the spin state. If I keep that laser for too long, then it's going to go back to ms equal to 0 state. So I do not have too long to actually read. And in between, I can perform whatever quantum operations that I want to perform. So what I can do is, I can just flip the spin, or I can actually create what are known as Rabi oscillations. It's a two-level system. So if you actually apply microwave frequency, which is in resonance with this level splitting, then you can create superposition state. Okay, you can create superposition state like what I'm showing here. So this is what we call a pi pulse. So you can go from 0 state to -1 state, or you can create any superposition state in between. Okay, this is what we call Rabi oscillation. On this side, what I'm showing is what is known as unecho experiment. So what does that mean? So what you're doing is you're creating a superposition state. You create a superposition state of 0 and -1 and let it evolve in the presence of its surrounding. Now it's going to interact with the surrounding. The surrounding has AC magnetic field. It has nuclear spins. Okay, so these nuclear spins are going to interact, and they will actually encode the phase on this superposition state. Okay, and then you can extract that phase later on by again bringing that spin state back into z-axis. So this is the, I'm assuming that at least some of you know the block sphere. So you start in spin 0 state, then you can actually create a superposition state, which then evolves in the presence of this AC magnetic field. It gets the phase gets encoded, and then you can actually at the end you can extract that phase. So you can actually use this even to actually do AC magnetic field sensing. Okay, so that's why this defect becomes extremely useful, because it's very sensitive to its local surrounding. And when I say sensitive, it can be sensitive to electric field, static electric field, magnetic field, temperature, AC magnetic field, AC electric field, all of those things. And that's why people have been focusing on this kind of defect for last 10, 15 years or so. They have actually shown that you can use this MG center, single defect, which is a single electron spin, to sense single nuclear spin, or you can actually have nanodiamonds, spins in nanodiamonds. You can inject those nanodiamonds into a living cell. Okay, and that living cell, because these are made out of carbon, so it's not too alien for this cell. By that, what I mean is that the cell is not going to die right away, at least. So you can inject it into a cell, and you can actually record local temperatures. And why is this important? Because temperature depends on the metabolism of that cell, right? So the cancerous cells, for example, they have different metabolism. That's why the temperature is different. So you can actually detect if a particular cell is cancerous or not just by injecting these nanodiamonds. Okay, so that is very promising. You can probe more exotic condensed matter physics with NV centers. You can probe quantum transport. People have done that with graphene. And you can also do quantum information processing, because what you have now is an electron spin with a coherence lifetime of few hundred microseconds, even at room temperature. So if I go back actually to previous slide, this is the coherence lifetime. Okay, Hahn-Echo lifetime. It's of the order of few hundred microseconds for bulk NVs, even at room temperature. So it becomes very nice qubit even at room temperature. Obviously, initialization and readout fidelities are not high enough at room temperature. So that's why in most cases you want to work at low temperature. And you can also use nuclear spins. I'll talk a bit about it. But I don't want to focus on quantum information processing for today, because I'll have to talk about resonance, readout, and blah, blah, blah. And it's more complex scenario. I've been working with that, but I don't want to focus on that today for today's presentation. I just want to focus on what can be done at room temperature. Okay, so that's what I'll be doing. So with that, I'm ending the section 1, which was like a basic background of this defect. With that, I'll start why controlling charge state is important. And if you remember, actually, in one of the slides, I showed that if you send this photon that we are collecting through a spectrometer, we actually get non-trivial spectrum. Okay, we don't just get a single peak. We get something that is more complicated, and it's related to the charge state. So this defect has two different charge states. Okay, so now if you want to deal with only NV minus, which has got these fantastic quantum properties, then first of all, you need to make sure that you are initializing the charge state itself, right? So how do you make sure that? Okay, so for that, you need to depend on different lasers. So in this particular experiment, what I'm doing is I have a setup, a confocal fluorescence microscope, but not with one setup. At one point of time, I had 6 different lasers in the same setup. But let's not go that way. Let's just focus on these 2 lasers. Green laser. Now the green laser can excite both of these defects, NV minus as well as NV zero. The energy of the green laser is around, the wavelength is around 530 nanometer. If you look at the zero phonon line of NV0, it's around 575. Zero phonon line of NV minus is 637. So green laser can excite both of them. Okay. Red laser, on the other hand, can only excite red laser wavelength is around 633 nanometer. So it can only excite this. It cannot excite NV0. Okay. So red laser is a good laser to detect how much NV minus you have got. Okay, because it won't be able to excite NV0. So it can only excite NV minus, and you can only read NV minus. So red laser is kind of a charge state readout laser. Okay, green laser is kind of charge state initialization laser. So let's do a very simple experiment. Let's start with green laser. Let's scan a particular sample. So the sample that I'm dealing with right now is a sample where you have got NV centers everywhere. Okay, you cannot actually look at single NV centers. They are present everywhere. Okay, ensemble samples, so to say. So you start with the green laser, you illuminate the sample with green laser, and then what you do is you illuminate a particular spot with a red laser, and then it's going to decay as a function of time. And now we have to answer why it decays. So what is happening here, if you go back, what is happening here, with red laser, you are actually exciting NV minus. But when you excite NV minus, you can actually perform a 2-photon process. First photon takes NV minus into excited state. Second photon knocks it up, removes that electron from excited state and puts it into conduction band of the diamond. Okay. So if that is happening, if you see, first photon excites it, the second photon puts it into conduction band. So it's actually removing the photon. It's a 2-photon process, not a virtual photon, 2 real photon process. So it depends on the lifetime of the excited state. So you are going from NV minus, it goes to NV zero. It's a one-way street. You cannot bring it back because there is no way to excite NV zero, right? So you start in NV minus, you shine red laser, and you take it to NV zero. Okay. Now the great thing is that it's a 2-photon process. So you go to very low intensity, and the rate of ionization is going to be very, very low because it's a 2-photon process. It depends on the lifetime. Okay, so if you don't get a second photon fast enough, then it's going to de-excite without actually getting ionized. That's a good thing about this. So, and what green laser does is that green laser can bring that NV0 back to NV minus again via 2-photon process. Okay, so what is happening here? You shine green laser. You have a circulation between NV minus and NV0. NV0 can come back to NV minus. So the rate actually is decided by ionization and recombination rate. Generally, you end up getting 70% NV minus. If you just shine green laser, 70% of the time you'll get NV minus. But with red, you start, if you are in NV0, you'll slowly ionize it. So what you can do is you can think of an experiment where you start in NV minus state, 70% NV minus state, you shine a red laser, it will decay. But the great thing about this 2-photon process is that it allows you to actually picture trapped charges. So these are real experiments, by the way, no simulations. So what we are doing here, we actually shine a red laser on initialized charge, initialized background, and then you can see that you are ionizing more and more defects. Okay, so for the first time we showed that we can still control the charge state very well, and then we can even image it without destroying it. Okay, without destroying it, because this has been generated by high power laser. Okay, something like this, and has been read with very low power laser. Okay, few microwatts, few tens of microwatts. And this is not only related to LV centers. This can be done. This is a property of any defect which has a band gap, which is a deep defect which sits inside a band gap. So this is valid to any other defect. The defect generally will have multiple charge states, and you can ionize, recombine. So in this particular case, I don't have time to go into details, but this can be done even with silicon vacancy centers in diamond. Okay, and what you can do is you start in a completely silicon vacancy minus devoid kind of background, and you can generate these defects just by shining laser. And it's intriguing. What is happening here is very intriguing. You are generating certain charges, and you form a donut, and you are forming a donut because the charges are moving in all possible directions, and eventually they get trapped. And after trapping, the charge state of the defect is changing, and the new defect that is getting formed is optically active. So you see the light coming from it if you shut. So it's very interesting. And one more thing that you can do in these kinds of defects is that not only lasers are useful to control the charge state, but you can also use electric field to control the charge. Because with electric field, you can move the charges, right? You can move the charges. You can do two things. You can either move the charges. So by moving the charges, you can actually decide which part of the sample is going to actually have more electrons or holes, or you can change the Fermi level as well. So there are multiple things that you can do, and in this particular experiment, this is additional knob to control the charge. Okay. Now I want to digress a little bit just to show what you can do with this. Okay, this is very important for quantum applications because you want to actually start with charge initialization. So any experiment starts with charge initialization, spin initialization, then quantum operation, and then readout. That's a typical quantum experiment. But then we thought, wait a minute, we can actually use this defect to store classical information because these are deep defects, right? The states are deep inside the band gap. So unless you provide enough energy, you are not going to cause any transitions. If you shine a photon or if you heat it, then obviously they are going to move. But unless, and even because these are, you need a high power laser, right? You are not going to be able to have these transitions easily. So we thought, why not actually use this as a DVD made out of diamond. Sounds insane, but hear me out. I mean, there is a reason why you can actually use this. First reason is that you can actually store information not in only 0 and 1, but also in grayscale, because at each pixel you have got thousands of LV centers, right? So you can go, in this particular case, what I'm doing is I start with a clean select. I store grayscale information, okay? So it goes from 0 to 10 actually, not 0 to 1. It goes from 0 to 10. Then you can clean it up. You can store another information, right? I mean, this is, look at the scale. This is 20 microns. We are storing this information, classical information is going to stay there forever unless you shine them, okay? And you can read out with red laser, low power red laser, and it won't destroy the information. You can also store information because it's a 2-photon process. Actually, you can store information into different slabs, into different planes within the same crystal. And this is what we are showing here. So with this, you can already get like 100 times more data density as compared to a normal DVD. It's still not sufficient because we are dealing with diamond, and diamond is most probably 100,000 times expensive as compared to a polymer, right? So then actually we, in the paper, again, I don't have time, but we thought that we could actually convert this charge state into spin state, and then using super resolution microscopy, you can store information with around 5 orders of magnitude more than a current hard drive. It's actually, so there are a couple of companies which are currently working on this. Let's see how far we can take. Okay. Now the catch with whatever I have said until now is that it works very well with bulk defects. What do I mean by bulk defects? Defects that are inside the crystal. Okay, that are very much isolated from the environment. There you can have very nice charge dynamics. You can control it very well and stuff like that. But these defects are not very useful for many quantum applications, specifically quantum sensing, because you want to deal with a defect that is very close to the surface. Then only the defect is going to interact with the environment outside the crystal, and then you can measure whatever you want to measure, like AC magnetic fields outside the crystal or static magnetic field or whatever, right? So it needs to be very close to the surface. Otherwise, it's not going to be useful. But the catch is that when you bring it close to the surface, all these very nice charge dynamics actually goes into the dustbin, right? I mean, you just need to throw it away, and you need to start from scratch. So what we did in this particular case is that we showed that when you bring the defect, and then you can just have this tunneling even in dark. So we came up with certain ways to mitigate this kind of tunneling process, but it is in general very difficult, and you need to actually come up with chemical kind of passivation methods so that you can actually reduce these surface states as much as possible if you want to use this defect. That was the idea. Apart from that, there is one more thing that is actually very useful when you study charge state, and let me explain it. It's going to be slightly complex, so here we are. So now, generally, conventional readout is something like this. I showed you a simple experiment on one of my previous slides. So what you are doing is you are initializing the charge and spin, and you perform whatever quantum operation that you want to perform, and at the end, you read out. How do you read out? You are reading out again by shining a laser and by collecting photons. But the trade-off here is, the issue is that when you shine a laser, the same process, that's why I have got green lasers here, right? The same process causes spin initialization. So if you actually shine laser for long enough time, after multiple iterations, you are going to lose your information. You are just destroying your information. So you have got only it's not a non-destructive way of reading out your spin state. It's a destructive way. You have got only 500 nanoseconds to read out, right? If you have got only 500 nanoseconds, generally you get around 100,000 photons per second. Calculate how many photons you can get in 500 nanoseconds. It comes out to be around 0.05 photons. It's nothing. So in one shot, you're going to get only 0.05 photons, which means you need to have hundreds of thousands of averages in order to get useful signal to noise ratio, right? That actually reduces the sensitivity of your experiment. Okay. So now the idea is this. The idea is that if you can actually convert this spin information, so you do the same thing, but at the end of this quantum operation, if you convert your spin information into charge information. Okay. So depending on the spin state, if you can get the charge state, so let's say that if you start in ms equal to 0 state, you end up in an NV0 state, and if you are in ms equal to plus minus 1 state after the quantum operation ends, you end up in NV minus state. If you can come up with that kind of protocol, then you can just use something like an orange or red laser, and you can read out the charge state for much longer. You have got milliseconds to read out. So within milliseconds, you can get 1,000 photons. Okay. So now your signal you can even reach single shot regime. But the problem is, how do you get this spin to charge conversion? And you can get it actually. This is one of the papers that we worked on. The way you do it, it looks complicated, but what is happening is that because my plus minus 1 state, if you remember how this whole intersystem crossing is happening, my plus minus 1 state is actually coupling to this singlet state. So what happens is that it does not spend too long in the excited state. This is my ground state, this is excited state, so I can go from ground state to excited state, and then plus minus 1 state straight away goes into this state. So if you bring in a second photon, then that second photon can actually ionize 0 state mostly as compared to plus minus 1 state. So indeed you can convert spin state into charge state, and this allows you to improve sensitivity. Now the catch is everything when it comes to quantum, nothing is for free, right? The catch here is that the overall sequence is very long. You need a millisecond to read out a charge state, right? Which means this does not improve your sensitivity if your quantum operation is very short. Only if your quantum operation is very long, then this kind of sequence makes sense. But in general, if you're doing nanoscale NMR and stuff like that, you can actually do this. Okay. So with that, I'm going to start talking. So you see, I'm slowly making it more and more complex. So now I'm going to deal with nuclear spin. So why are these nuclear spins useful? Okay. So we dealt with electron spin. What we saw, let me just summarize. What we saw is that I've got this electron spin, is spin 1 particle. Then I've got this 2-level system. Here, I generally deal with 0 and -1. When I apply magnetic field, plus and -1 levels are going to split, right? And then I can actually deal with a 2-level system. I can manipulate that system, but first of all, I also need to deal with charge initialization, spin initialization, which can be done using green waves. Then I can do lots of operations, and then I can read out either using a conventional readout or spin to charge readout. Now the nuclear spins are actually very useful. The reason they are useful are for okay. Let me list all the reasons. First of all, they are very nice quantum memories. So they are more isolated from the surrounding. So you can store information, quantum information for much longer. So you can think of a scenario where you use electron spin to perform quantum operations, but at the end, you actually store that quantum information into nuclear spin. You just dump it there, and it's going to retain information for long. So that's quantum registers. Okay. Then you can use them using nuclear spins. You can do high fidelity readout, which I'll talk about. And then one more very practical thing that you can do is that you can use these nuclear spins. You can actually polarize these nuclear spins, because these electron spins are interacting with all these nuclear spins via hyperfine interaction. You can use electron. Now, electron you can just polarize by shining laser, right? So you get very high polarization by just shining laser. Now you can transfer that polarization from electron spin to nuclear spin. And why is that useful? It's very useful for applications in NMR and MRI. The nuclear spins generally do not interact with the environment, right? So you need to have huge 9 Tesla magnets to polarize one nuclear spin out of billion nuclear spins. That's why you see NMR magnets are so huge. You need superconducting coils in order to generate those magnetic fields. MRI instruments are very expensive because you need to generate 3 Tesla magnetic field using superconducting coils. So if you can come up with a mechanism to actually polarize these nuclear spins without using these crazy instruments, then that's going to make, I mean, that's a big kind of holy grail as far as MRI and MR is concerned. So let me talk about a couple of experiments that I have done. I know that I have got only 10 minutes now. So let me talk about this, and then we can chat about whatever I've been talking about. So first experiment, it's a kind of a real world experiment. I don't have time to go into detail, but I just want to convey this idea that with NV center, you can come up with a sequence that allows you to transfer its polarization to nuclear spins. And in this particular case, what we're doing is we have got NMR magnet, but NMR magnet is only being used to record the final polarization. The magnetic field itself is not generating that polarization. Okay, so in this case, if you look at the NMR signal, this would be the NMR signal with 9 Tesla magnet. Okay, this is what you would get. Okay, this will take like lots of time, 24 repeats, and you get this signal. Now I have got this my diamond sample here below the magnet. I'm only working at 50 millitesla, not at 9.4 Tesla, and then I can generate huge polarization. I'm generating polarization here, and then I shoot that sample inside just to measure how much I have generated. Okay, and I'm generating crazy amount of polarization. Okay, and I don't have time, unfortunately, to actually explain the mechanism. It's a 5-spin flip mechanism, flip-flop mechanism. It's a very interesting quantum problem. So we are dealing simultaneously with 5 different spins, and that's how you actually end up with very nice polarization, carbon-13 polarization. There is another protocol which might be of interest to some of you, which is which is, I think, the most popular protocol as far as NV centers are concerned, which we actually devised. So this protocol actually deals with changing microwave frequencies. So the previous thing that I showed involved a single crystal diamond. Now it's a nice proof of principle experiment, but think of a typical medical environment. You can't use a single crystal diamond. You cannot inject it. You want something that can be injected into a patient that can actually generate hyperpolarized nuclear species within their body. So you want to deal with something that can be injected, which is something like nanodiamonds. Now, nanodiamonds are good, but the issue with nanodiamonds is that you cannot align magnetic field to nanodiamonds. They are going to be oriented randomly. So this particular protocol, although is slightly insensitive to magnetic field alignment, it is still sensitive. So you need to be able to come up with a protocol that is insensitive to magnetic field alignment. And this is something what we design. So if some of you know about integrated solid defect or Landau-Zener crossings, I know that these might sound to you abstract words, but I'm just throwing them around for people who know about these things. So what we are doing actually is that we have got ensembles of nanodiamonds or microdiamonds, and then we are sweeping microwave frequencies at a particular speed that allow certain transition to be adiabatic and certain other transition to be non-adiabatic, causing a net polarization at the end. And then it is very insensitive. So this plot, what it is showing is the final polarization of nuclear spins as a function of angle of the external magnetic field, and you see it's very much insensitive. Okay, it is sensitive, but it's very much insensitive. In a large domain, you still are able to get huge polarization. So there is one more thing that you can actually use nuclear spins, or which is very similar to charge spin to charge conversion readout that I said. Okay, so the problem again is that within 500 nanoseconds in the readout, I'm only collecting 0.05 photons. So now the idea is that I convert this quantum information that is stored in electron spin into nuclear spin using certain protocol. I don't have time to go again into details, but if I can devise a protocol that allows me to swap this information into nuclear spin, then nuclear spins are much more robust to read out to shining laser. They still interact, but they're more robust, so you can read out the information. This is something that we have done with the host nuclear spin. You can actually store information into this host nuclear spin. So if you remember, this is ODMR plot, but now a single peak, single NV peak splits into 2 peaks because it's interacting with host nuclear spin. And you can come up with a protocol whereby you actually transfer. It's known as electron nuclear swap. You can have this swap protocol. You can transfer information, and then you can read out at high magnetic field you can get single shot fidelity of 85%. Imagine that. You were getting 0.05 photons only single shot, and now this protocol at around 420 millitesla can allow you to get 85% fidelity for a single shot. So nuclear spins are very useful, okay? Although they cause decoherence, which is the next thing that I'm going to do. Now, the reason why I'm going to talk about these recent experiments that I have been doing is because many of you might be interested in how you can implement machine learning. Okay, so COVID kind of motivated me to look into this problem. So I had no access to my lab, so I'm an experimentalist, and I've been working on decoherence related problems. So what is decoherence? And I thought that machine learning is going to be useful. So in last 4-5 minutes, I'm just going to talk about these decoherence. So now what is happening is this is my electron spin. It interacts with all of these spins that are in the surrounding, right? And then if you perform a particular experiment, you create a superposition, some quantum state is going to decay because of this decoherence, because of these interactions. Okay, it's a loss of information that we are not able to directly measure, but we can indirectly detect it. Okay, it's stored in this decay. Now, when I say indirect, what I mean is that if you can solve this integral equation, then you can actually know something about the environment, which is kind of quantum sensitive, right? So let me explain what this expression is. So this is this decay. Basically, this is how the coherence is decaying. This is the noise spectrum. This is something, the property of the environment. And this is related, it's a Fourier transform of the sequence that you're implementing to get this particular experiment, okay, the result. Okay, so I do have access to C, which is this curve. I do have access to this protocol, which is what I'm implementing, and I want to get how the environment is behaving, okay, the properties of the surrounding. But it's an integral equation. It's not possible to solve this equation. There is no unique solution. So generally what people do is people assume that this S of omega is like a, the Fourier transform of this thing is like a delta function. It's not a delta function, but that's the closest that people can do. It's a horrible approximation, but at least you get some qualitative inference. So what I thought is that if you flip this integral equation and train a neural network, then you can, in principle, use that neural network within a certain constraint to predict the most probable noise spectrum. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by that. What I mean is that I have got, I start with certain noise. Okay, I assume that a system has a certain noise. Now you can make that noise model very complex. You can combine multiple theoretical noise models. You can add random noise. You can do whatever you like. Okay, so you start with certain noise model. Okay, when I say certain, I mean that there are certain constraints. That's where constraints are coming into picture. Okay, so I start with certain noise model. Once I have noise model, I can get this coherence quite easily just by doing this integration. It's an exact problem that I'm solving. If I know S of omega, I can get C of t. Okay, it's an exact problem. But then I flip it. So what I do is I generate 100,000 pairs of S of omega and C of t. And then I train a neural network using those pairs. And that neural network actually understands the correlation between C of t and S of omega. So now it learns to solve this integral equation under particular constraints. And then when I give that neural network, artificial neural network, a real experimental curve, I'm going to end up with the most, it will predict the most probable S of omega, noise spectrum, which is very interesting. And you see the error rates go from around 10% to 0.1%. So this is what we had shown on simulations, but you can actually, we did the experiments, we came up with very improved protocol that can be implemented directly on a real experiment. and we were able to show that it indeed works. And it's very promising. Actually, this is something that I have started focusing. And just to give you some idea, now I feel like this protocol is so useful and it's very generic. It has nothing to do with optically active spins. It's actually, you can implement it on any qubit for that matter. And then you can actually get some information about surrounding. Once you have the information, you can then suppress the decoherence. You can do all of that. And currently, we have got access. IIT Madras has got access to IBM quantum computers, lots of them. So currently, we are implementing some of these protocols on IBM Q chip. So stay tuned. Hopefully, we'll be able to actually come up with some good results. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation. This is the summary. I talked about why these spins are useful, optically active spins, how they can be used for doing quantum sensing. Then I talked about how to control charge state, how to control nuclear spin state and why that is useful. And then at the end, I talked very briefly about AI-driven protocols to mitigate decoherence. With that, I want to actually thank you. I want to thank my previous supervisors, Carlos Merlis from City College of New York, John Morton from UCL, all my group members, and this is my group. I've got 2 PhD students, and this is my close collaborator. I'm part of Center for Quantum Computing and Information Processing. CQIT is an Institute of Eminence-based Center of Excellence at IIT Madras. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So thank you, Professor Dhomkar, for this talk. Now session is open for the QA and session. So participants can unmute themselves and ask questions.
You can ask any question, by the way. It doesn't have to be very complex. Everything that I said is fairly on the complex side, so we can just chat.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for your talk. First question is on slide 15th,
Okay.
quantum sensing, quantum sensor. Could you please inform what is special with quantum sensing as compared to quantum detection or quantum detector? That is quantum detector which converts photocurrent to electron current. So here,
okay, so
please...
yes, so detection is a different thing, and a sensor. So sensor needs to be sensitive to something, right? So if you want to detect something, your sensor needs to be sensitive to that. So let's say if you want to detect, if you want to build a detector that is sensitive to photons, then you most probably use some kind of a silicon avalanche photodiode or something like that, which will allow you to detect the photon, right? So now what we are saying is that when I talk about sensor, what I mean is that this particular, you can think of this as a small tiny magnet, right? So this tiny magnet, if you bring it very close to anything, any target that you want to sense, if you want to, let's say, sense electric field, magnetic field, this small spin is going to interact with this external electric field, magnetic field, static or AC, whatever, or temperature. It will have some effect, and then we can measure that effect and get some information. And that's why I'm calling this as a sensor. It's a sensor to sense electric field, magnetic field, and blah, blah. Okay? Is that clear?
Yes, thank you. So it is a multi-objective, right? You can sense.
Yes, that's one thing, and the other thing is that because it's an atomic defect, right? you can do nanoscale sensing. You can actually bring it very close to whatever you want to sense. Imagine an instrument where you have this defect at the end of small needle. Okay, then you can actually move this like an AFM. You can move this needle, you can bring it very close to your target, and you can sense that. And that's why it's very sensitive to local environment only, and that's why it's a very nice nanoscale sense.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, could you please name deep learning software packages you used in your calculations?
Yes, so it's mostly TensorFlow, so whatever is available publicly. So TensorFlow I have used. I'm soon going to actually upload on GitHub. I'll upload a couple of codes that I've written. It's long overdue. I've already written 2 papers, but unfortunately, all the PhD and postdocs kept graduating and finding something better to do. So we never ended up putting it on kind of GitHub. But these are very standard protocols. Initially, we started, if you know anything about deep learning, initially we started with what are known as LSTMs, long short-term memory networks. People used to use them for series data analysis. And it's all publicly available. So we use TensorFlow and Keras to build the networks, to train the networks. And then mostly Python, you can use even Google Colab or something like that to generate data. Once you generate data, you can then use TensorFlow to generate networks and train them, and at the end, you can train them. So that's how so currently we have, what we saw in the second paper is that if we use convolutional neural networks, I don't know how many of you are used to all these languages, but convolutional neural networks are something that people are using for image recognition these days. So if you hear anything about cat versus dog images or handwritten digits and stuff like that, all these things are using convolutional neural networks, right? So we are also using, so the most recent paper uses convolutional neural network to actually do these predictions. Again, built by TensorFlow.
Okay, so does it mean I'm from my background or from my understanding, in quantum mechanics we use tensor products, right? So it is like similar things are.
Yeah. So I mean, I need a whole different lecture if I need to explain how the neural networks work. But it's basically all vector products, vector algebra, and how they actually train neural networks is very interesting. They call back propagation. So it's very interesting. The reason why it works here is not because of quantum mechanics. The reason why it works here is because I'm dealing with this very specific problem, which is integral equation, which does not have unique solutions. But if I'm able to apply certain constraints, which I can, and generate particular simulated data, I can then train a neural network, which then kind of knows correlation between the thing that I want to measure and the thing that I have access to, right? And because it forms these correlations, it can actually predict the most probable solution. So that's why I'm saying most probable, because it's 95% fidelity, right? 5% of the time you will not get it right, because obviously there are noises and other stuff, and there is no one-to-one mapping, so to say. It's not a one-to-one mapping problem. Otherwise, there is no reason why you should use machine learning. If you can one-to-one, if you can do one-to-one mapping, that you don't need to use machine learning. So why you need to use machine learning more probably would be a different talk altogether, which I would like to give someday. But yeah, that's different.
Thank you. So it means that Tensor, this software, it uses more sophisticated or more complicated tensor techniques.
Exactly. Okay. So what they have done is that they have vectorized everything. They work with matrices, n-dimensional matrices, and they have written a software that actually multiplies all these n-dimensional matrices very efficiently. so that you can train this neural network. And once it's trained, basically, why matrices? Because matrices are the weights of these individual artificial neurons, and that's what you need to optimize. That optimization process is known as training the neural network, and that's what this kind of. So you can even build your neural network using very normal kind of Python, okay, very typical tensor products. You don't need any of this. The only difference is that they have actually put together a lot of effort to make it more efficient. That's the only thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So are there any more questions? Okay, so if not, let's thank Siddharth.
Thank you. Thank you so
know,
much.
We'll also we'll talk with you. I have interest in this AI.
Definitely, I would be
combining
interested.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, I have only recently
we'll
come
discuss
to
more.
India. I have spent the last 13, 14 years outside, so I don't know many people, frankly. So I would be very much interested. Next time, if I get a chance, I would like to come to Kolkata and maybe then we can.
Most welcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank